first come to Winona?
I first came to Winona because of a woman. I think that for many people it's because of that, you know, the person who becomes their spouse or their partner or whatever that tends to take them places. And I came here on actually came down the Pickwick Road off of the highway for the very first time on this. It was September and it was foggy, and of course it was green. And that was my first time I had ever come here, and that was, my intention was, I was with Beth, who is currently my wife, and we were heading to her parents' house. She didn't know, but I was actually going to, when we got there, was going to ask her parents permission to marry her. So that was my first trip to Winona.
So what did you think after that first trip?
Well, they said yes, so it was pretty positive. I mean, I really liked Winona, and actually shortly thereafter, we immediately left, and I flew to what was the Soviet Georgia, now the Republic of Georgia, to teach English and to study Russian. And but when I came back, I ended up coming back to Winona, and we lived here. We got married down at St. T's, down by Lourdes, West Campus, and I really, really liked Winona. You know, I loved the green. I loved the lushness. I had been living before that in central Washington, which is fairly dry on the east side of the mountains, and I really prefer the humid and the warmth, and there was just something, you know, Rivendale-ish, if any of you are familiar with Tolkien, you know, about Winona, that you come down off of the ridge into this little valley on the river. Yeah, I really liked it.
So besides the environment, what are some other things that have kept you here?
Well, I have 5 children, and probably the biggest thing that's kept me here, one of the biggest benefits about being here, let's put it that way, is the fact that I know that my kids, I can tell them, you know, even my 9-year-old, yeah, you can ride your bike downtown. Yes, you can go down to the lake and you can ride around. You want to go to a friend's house? Well, I'm not going to drive you. There's your bicycle. You know, if you want to go, you can ride your bike. And so it's those things which, as a father of 5, it's a huge benefit for me not to have to worry about what they're getting into, not to suggest that Winona doesn't have drugs, it doesn't have crime. Of course it does. But I also am fairly certain that if my kids are involved in something, I'm likely going to hear about it because fortunately, by virtue of the business I run, I know a lot of people, and you know, being involved in schools and whatnot, I tend to just know a lot of people. So if my kids are out and about, someone who knows them is likely going to see them. Unfortunately for them, fortunately for me. And then of course the other thing that's keeping us here is the fact that two things, and they're related. When we moved out here, we moved to Winona specifically because we wanted to start a coffee business. I was in law enforcement out in Washington State, obviously a completely different kind of customer service. And we had this idea that we could come out here and we could start this coffee shop. My in-laws were living here. They've been here since '85. And so, you know, we had 4 kids when we were out there, and we thought, well, wouldn't that be nice if we could come out? We could be closer to family. We have that family support with the kids. And we have been very fortunate in that we started the business, and we are in our 8th year, and we're still in business. And part of that is, I'm not sure if Winona's responsible for that, if we're responsible for that, if there's some, you know, fate or luck. But Winona is certainly a huge part of that success that we've had because of the smallness of the town, and because my mother-in-law and I, who run the place, are very similar in that we just love people. We love being around people. We love talking. We love interacting. And Winona is just about the right size of a town for that.
What's a very memorable experience for you that happened in Winona or just anywhere?
Actually, I'm going to do the anything category rather than Winona, if that's all right. I actually just got back from Washington State. I was out there for 2 days. I had a good friend, a very close friend, who was also a police officer with me, who suffered an injury and ended up brain dead. And I went out to be with friends, to be with him, before he died. And so, of course, I've started thinking a lot about that time I spent as a police officer and those moments. And was just talking with another close friend yesterday, and the three of us had been on a team. There was a riot in town, of all things, and about 2,000 people, and it was mostly out of control, and we were almost entirely unprepared for that kind of a thing. And so we ended up going in, and as if you can imagine, marching into this thing, trying to be orderly, and really being pretty much scared out of your wits, because there's people all over throwing things. We have shields. And I'm thinking, how did I get from being, this sort of long-haired English major who is teaching English in Russia to walking down the street with a riot shield? It was, people throwing shit at us, and there's stuff coming from all directions. What you want to do, because you're scared, you're angry, all these things, is you want to throw the shield down, you want to chase after somebody and beat the snot out of them, because you have all these emotions going on, and you can't. And then having to march in, and really what we did is we kind of got our asses kicked, and then we had to march out backwards, stuff still coming at us from all directions, and having to just sort of take it, you know what I mean? And then even more difficult, the next week and the next month and the next year after that, having to interact with these same people who before were over here throwing stuff at you, and now you're having to talk to them civilly. And that was difficult. That was probably one of the most formative experiences of my time living out in Washington State. It's, I didn't go into law enforcement because I studied it or anything. I needed a job, and I saw this advertisement and thought, hey, that sounds really interesting. And it certainly was, but that was an experience that, while I don't regret having gone through it, it still brings up a great deal of emotion and sort of the knots in the stomach and that angst that that you experience when you're helpless and and feel completely vulnerable.
Was that riot kind of the final straw for you?
No, actually, ironically, this was up in the sort of the Greek Row area, and this was Washington State University was in this town, Pullman, in eastern Washington. And I actually ended up getting assigned to a position, the good old-fashioned beat position, where I walked 5 nights a week from 5 p.m. to 4 a.m. in these neighborhoods. And my job was to do this right here, to learn people's names and to try to understand what was going on and how to prevent these things from happening before they got to the point where we couldn't control it anymore. And the difficulty, this is where the real difficulty, like this I think was led really to that last straw that you're referring to, and that is I could come walking up in uniform, and you see a cop walking up, and what's your reaction? There's a couple things, the beard goes here, depending on how old you are, or those sorts of things. But typically what I got was just sort of people yelling derisive things, or you can imagine what get yelled at by law enforcement or at law enforcement, and then to get closer and for them to recognize me is like, hey, it's Officer Halleck, hey, how's it going? And so it was really an interesting, instant switch of this guy must be a total asshole because he's in law enforcement to, it's Carew. Oh, that's cool then. And it was such a disconnect between how do I continue to treat, to treat this person with any amount of respect given what I was receiving back. And well, unfortunately that was a part of the job I had accepted, not a happy part. And really it just, that combined with graveyard shift, all these things, I knew for me, I needed to go do something different with my life. And honestly, having moved and opened this, coffee business in which almost every customer's pretty happy to see me, and I'm happy to see them, and it makes such a huge difference in the interactions and how I feel about myself, how I feel about my family, the hours I keep. My general mood is, it's amazing that switch.
Did you feel like once you came to Winona, kind of a weight was a little bit lifted off your shoulders?
Well, certainly the stress, and I have to tell you, when I was just back, this was just last week. It was a week ago today. I was in Pullman, and driving around town, driving from the hospital to the police department, driving, I could still, I can feel that. I can feel that. It's not even, it's not conscious even. I'm aware of it, but I'm certainly not in control of it. And yeah, it really was a complete lack of stress. Just, physiologically, okay, I don't have to eat Tums anymore, on a nightly basis. Those sorts of things, which a completely different type of mental and physical health. But yeah, absolutely, it was a weight lifted.